Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Learning with Drones podcast. I am Heather Monthy, an educator, technologist, pilot, certificated flight instructor, and STEM education advocate. I'm so excited to have you guys here today. In this episode, I'm going to be reviewing an article called Practical Pedagogy for Embedding Drone Technology into Business and Computing Curriculum. I think that this article gave some really practical advice for anybody who is interested in bringing drones into the classroom and into their education program. But first, before we go over that, I want to share with you another podcast in the Education Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jacob Chastain, host of the Teach Me Teacher podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
All right, so let's dive in. So this is a research article that was published in 2018, and it was written by Kuzma, Robinson, Dobson, and Law. And I'm excited about this one because there was some really practical is in the title of the article, but there was some really just very practical things that I think anybody at any level of doing any sort of drone education program, whether it's in K-12, higher ed, as their business, law enforcement, first responders, that kind of stuff. These are all really good things to take into consideration when developing a drone education program. And they also cited a couple of different other really good articles as well that I will link to in the show notes. I'll give you guys all the sources so you can go and look at these articles if you'd like as well. So I did find these off Google Scholar. These are not articles that just come right up in Google. But if you're familiar with Google Scholar, you can find these in there. But again, I'll put the links there for you so you can find the articles. So one of the first points that was brought up is that, and I think that we all know this, if you're listening to this podcast, you know this, but that the use of drones has expanded outside of the military a lot over the last, 15 years or so. It's expanded out of the military into business applications, and then it's being used in multiple industries within business. And one thing that I have seen over the last 5 years, and it is March of 2020 right now, one of the things I've seen over the last 5 years is that the drone technology has become so much more affordable that now we're seeing this shift into bringing drones into the classrooms. And so as that technology becomes more and more affordable, you find different industries, different business use cases for it. And now you also see it getting into, education and in the classroom. So there was an article written in 2015 by the European Commission. And what they did is they performed an impact report and found that by 2025, drones will account for 10% of all air traffic. Again, I kind of take these kind of reports, and I talked about this in the last episode as well. I kind of take these kind of reports with a grain of salt because they're just trying to predict where they see things going. Things are good. Sometimes they're correct, sometimes they're not. I did my PhD, I did my dissertation on green technology and IT managers, decision-making process of that. And, there were some astronomical, numbers in there that by, 2018 or something, it was supposed to be a $5 billion industry. So things pan out, things don't pan out. So kind of take those things with a grain of salt. And then also in this article, it was also stated that the number of drone jobs in the U.S. is set to exceed 100,000 by 2025. I don't really know what kind of drone jobs that they researched because, there's a lot of different drone types of jobs that are probably currently don't exist just yet. So it would be interesting to see, how this field looks in 2025 and what kind of jobs have been created over the next 5 years. So I think that as we talk about a pedagogical approach to drones in the classroom, this really applies to any sort of technology and how we bring it into the classroom. So as a specific technology advances, the approach or the pedagogical approach or andragogical approach, if you're talking about adults, needs to shift, and that we need to include more technology-based competencies within that curriculum. So, I talk about this quite a bit, and if you've talked to me in person, I bring it up quite a bit, is that when you're putting together a technology-based curriculum, you're not necessarily saying, students need to know this software. Students need to know how to use this operating system. Students need to know how to use this piece of technology. That's not necessarily what we're talking about here. It's more the skills that are needed to be able to use that specific piece of technology. And the same goes for drones. We're not saying, students will learn how to use drones. It's what are the skills that come along and the competencies that come along with being able to use drones, understanding airspace, using good aeronautical decision making, things like that. And there was another article that actually it's a book that I actually just read. There are a couple things that are out of date in this book, but it's still a really good book. It's by Carnahan, 2016, Carnahan et al. And they state in that book that the inclusion of drones in the curriculum does improve student motivation and engagement. And I think that, that's going to be true when you have any sort of hands-on, practical, concrete ways that students can see their work being done. So it doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or 50 years old, when you can see what you're doing and see how the things that you do and change can affect the output, right? So thinking about something like drone programming, for example, teaching programming is very difficult because it's very abstract. You can't necessarily sort of visualize or see what's happening behind the scenes or see what's really going on. Drones make that much more concrete for people of all ages. So when you are, programming a drone to do a specific task, and then you execute it and it does that task, and then you can make small tweaks to your code, and then you can see those small tweaks when the drone is flying, that becomes much more motivating and much more engaging for students of all levels to really just, stay engaged, be excited about what they're doing. And it allows us to give students those concrete examples of how some of the different STEM principles are applied. So one other thing that was brought up in this article was that, and we've talked about this a lot in this podcast, and if you listen to this podcast when it was still called About the T in STEM, I talked a lot about soft skills, professional skills, that kind of thing that's needed. It's not just the technical skills that are needed to use some of these different technologies, drones included. So things like soft skills, or what I like to call professional skills, these are very valuable skills to employers. And so these are going to be things like teamwork, problem solving, presentation skills, project management skills, all those kinds of things are going to be used when you bring drones into the classroom. And as much as you can do to bring those skills out in anybody that you're teaching how to use drones, if you're teaching, 25-year-olds on, how to start a drone-based business, it's not just the skills of flying the drones. There's all these other things that come alongside that. So in this book, Carnahan et al., the book is called Drones in Education. What they did is they talked about a little bit about the SOAR model for use of drones in the classroom. And I'll do a separate podcast episode just about that book. But because it was cited in this practical pedagogy research article, I wanted to bring it up because that's what this article is based off of, is this SOAR model, SOAR. So it focuses really heavily on the student's experience, but it uses research-based education in ethics, legal, and pragmatic uses of drone technology. So the SOAR model is this. S is for safety and legal issues. O is for operations, flight management, and troubleshooting. A is for active learning, engagement in solving problems. And then R is for research and practical applications. So the authors of this article state that this model has been used successfully in K-12 applications of drones, which the book by Carnahan et al., 2016, was written specifically for K-12 applications of drones. This research article then that I'm talking about is more at the higher ed level, so business, computing, that kind of stuff, and using drones in like sort of a higher ed setting or research-based setting. So what they suggest is that this SOAR model has been successful in K-12 application, so it could also be successful in other types of drone education and training. So say you are training current drone pilots on, aerial mapping and surveying. This model could be used in that situation as well. So what they did is they aligned all their different activities to one of the 4 components of the SOAR model. So safety, operations, active learning, or research. Each task or each objective was aligned to one of those. And so what they did at the very beginning, as they were looking at like, how can we bring a drone education program here, there was a couple things that they had to do. So the first thing is the insurance company, they worked very closely with their insurance company, and the insurance company is going to be concerned with risk and risk management. So what they did is they required a site risk management. They needed to know what specific drones would be flown. They created safety plans. They did a site survey. They did a risk rating matrix, and then they did all this for all these different site-specific locations. So there's going to be indoor and outdoor locations where those drone flights might occur. So they did this assessment for every single one of those places where the drone flights might occur on their campus. So if you're in a school that's kind of large, and you guys are thinking about bringing a drone education program in there, you might want to sit down and go, okay, where are some potential uses or potential places that we might bring a drone program in? So is it going to be in the gymnasium? Is it going to be in a large classroom? Is it going to be in the cafeteria? Is it going to be outdoors? Is it going to be in the playground? Is it going to be in the football field? Like, where is it going to be? All right. So what you would want to do then is you'd want to do a preliminary assessment on each one of those spots to sort of figure out what is going to be the best spot for you to do this. So what they said is that they used the gym, and they used some larger classrooms that didn't have any expensive audiovisual equipment. I don't know about you, but I still crash my drone quite a bit, so that's probably a good thing. And they did eliminate some outdoor sites. But again, you have to do that preliminary assessment to figure out, are we going to use it? Or are we going to rule it out? And if you do rule it out, document it, right? So that you're not asking yourself the same question 6 months from now. So this study or this article was written in the UK. So they're using CAA laws there. And there's some laws there around being around high voltage cables. And I'm not too familiar with the CAA laws. I'm in the US, so I'm very familiar with the FAA laws. But they ruled out some places due to high voltage cables nearby near their school. And then they also decided to help with risk management, that it was necessary that they were going to have a certificated pilot on grounds for any type of event that they were doing around drones. So whether it's a seminar, research activity, workshop, whatever it might be. And then it was also decided that they needed to train some of their more staff to become certificated drone pilots. The next piece I wanted to talk a little bit about is sort of, what they're going to be doing. What are the outcomes? Okay. So there's another article that was cited in this article by Idries et al. In 2015. I will link to that in the show notes as well. But they talk about, that there are both technical and non-technical needs in drone operations. So when you are putting together a drone education program, think about first of all, who are your clients? Are they teachers? Are they real estate brokers? Are they, do they work in the utilities? Figure out what are the more non-technical needs with regards to that industry. So that's I'm talking more here about like the business processes that they need to follow, but then also understanding project management and how to take, a client from idea to implementation and execution, right? And so what you need to do is you need to help them if whoever you're working with. And if it's you that you're trying to figure this out, you first need to address the business application point of view is how is this going to be applied in business? So how are you actually going to use this? Is this just seem like a really cool idea? Or what is it that we're trying to accomplish with drones? You also want to look at some more non-technical things such as project management, risk management, operations, scheduling, that kind of thing. But then you also want to make sure that you are including the practical hands-on flying experience. So I know here in the US, to become a certificated commercial remote pilot, it's simply a 60-question written multiple choice exam. We don't need to demonstrate any sort of hands-on practical flying experience. So I think that it's important as you are, trying to build a drone education program is that you give that hands-on practical flying experience. So the outcomes, I'm just going to read for you what the outcomes were for this particular research study. This is what they had decided were going to be the outcomes of their drone education program, and it's all aligned to the SOAR model. Okay, so each one of these aligns to one or more of the outcomes in the SOAR model. So the first is to have knowledge or display knowledge of the legal framework in which drones operate. So that's going to be different depending on where you are. Even within the US, there are local ordinances, state and local ordinances that you need to be aware of. So that is probably more of a non-technical piece to what you need to know when you are operating drones in an education program. The next is to complete a risk assessment and complete site surveys to industry standards. So depending on what industry you are in, those industry standards are going to be different. So again, if you're in utilities, your industry standards are going to be very different from someone who is doing an after-school program at a local, elementary school. Okay, so those standards are going to be very different. And the third outcome is to demonstrate confidence in operating a drone safely. How you demonstrate confidence, I don't know exactly how you measure that, but what I would look for here is making the right decisions and taking control of making decisions and not waiting for someone else to make a decision. If you are the remote pilot in command, that you are operating in confidence, you have control over the situation, and you take charge when decisions need to be made. Number 4 is to successfully implement a practical project using drone technology. So again, depending on what industry you're working in, help your students, help your clients implement a practical project that they can use, that they can walk away with and say, okay, hey, here's how we're going to do this. Solve a business problem, find a business problem for your students to solve. It's rather than just, here, I'm going to teach you how to fly a drone. It's what problem are you solving with this drone, and then successfully implement a project. So take it from idea to implementation and execution. And then number 5 is to discuss the potential future applications for drone technology. And I think this is really a great way to stimulate creativity, innovation, and coming up with new ideas. Once I think you get exposed to any sort of technology, doesn't matter what it is, that can really help people sort of see the world from a different lens, I guess. So say you are, just take myself for an example. I've been involved in aviation my whole life. I've been a pilot since 97. I've worked in education since 03 and STEM education specifically. And I have been waiting sort of for this moment to happen where this drone technology becomes much more affordable to get it in front of more and more people, right? But I could see that years and years and years ago, the technology wasn't there yet. And so because I was able to take sort of my unique background knowledge, I was able to see what might be some potential future uses for drones in education, right? So you take your own experience, take your own background, and then as you start learning more and more and more about a new technology, think about the different ways in your life or in your business or in your classroom how you might be able to apply this to help solve a problem. And so each one of those 5 outcomes are aligned to one of the components in the SOAR model. So in the next part of this research article, what they did was they gave some examples of projects that you could do to sort of extend the learning for your students. So again, this is just going to depend on what type of drone education program you are running, but these are just some really good ideas. So they gave 6 different ideas, so I'll just go through them here really quickly. So the first was to construct a 3D model of a building using aerial footage. The next was to construct an annotated panorama that can be used on social media or developing a video presentation for a real estate agent. The third one would be to capture high quality video footage to use in a film drama. Number 4 would be to explore the potential for drone delivery of small packages. Number 5 would be to use drone photography and panorama stitching to create an isometric map of a large area. And then number 6 would be to use drones as an educational tool for primary students to and so say you're at a university, you're pre-service teacher, you could use drones then as an educational tool, as you are making that transition to becoming an in-service teacher. And then finally, the authors give a couple different lessons learned, which I think are very important for anyone who is considering bringing drones into the classroom or doing any sort of drone education program. Flying too many drones at one time can be problematic with too many radio frequencies all in the same small space. I know that there's a couple, like not non-drones, but like robotic-based education programs that if you have more than 2 or 3 in a room, like they don't work very well. So you want to make sure that whatever drone you do choose to use for your program, that, if you've got 20 people flying in a small area, you want to make sure that the radio frequencies aren't interfering with each other. Flying in a gym. So there's pros and cons to flying in a gym. So if you're flying in a gym, that you don't fall necessarily under the FAA's airspace rules or whatever, aviation authorities in your country. But that it just is it's going to limit the number of drones that can be flown at one time just due to space. But so you've got 2 things. You've got the too many frequencies, and then just due to space that you may not be able to have as many drones flying at the same time that you would like to have. So what they did is in this particular research article, what they did is they limited it to 20 students. They agreed that that was a good number due to those 2 constraints. They also suggested having a trained and certificated pilot with an assistant present for each flying session to help meet those safety requirements. So again, that goes back to risk management and planning. But they had suggested that having a certificated pilot, remote pilot, and an assistant present for each flying session will help meet those safety requirements. They also suggested that you schedule times according to daylight hours if you're going to be doing flights outdoors. I know as you get into more of the northern latitudes, again, this was in the UK, so you get more into the northern latitudes that in the winter times, daylight hours can be an issue, and especially if you're in the southern hemisphere as well. In certain times of year, the farther south you are, those daylight hours are going to be limited. So make sure you're paying attention to that. If you're doing activities outdoors when you are scheduling things, pay attention to when your daylight hours are. One other thing that they had suggested was that because weather can be problematic in the UK, what they did is they booked both an outdoor and an indoor location, but then that created some sort of double booking scheduling problems in their system. It looked like things were being double booked, but really it was more just, if the weather was bad, they wouldn't conduct the activity outdoors, they would just move it indoors. And one other suggestion that they had for educators was that each lesson is going to be different in structure. So understand that you are going to have certain times where, if you've got a 3-hour chunk of time that you're working with students, that 2 hours of it is going to need to be lecture, or an hour of it's going to need to be lecture before doing more of the hands-on. And then other times, if you have a 3-hour chunk, the whole time is going to be all hands-on. So flying anything, so flying an airplane, flying a drone, it's not all just flying skill. There's a lot of things that need to be learned on the ground. And so you need to understand that not every class lesson is going to include actual hands-on flying time. And one thing that, that they mention here, but I also talk about a lot that I think is really cool, is that this is a technology that's going to cross multiple disciplines. So it's important to remember that when developing your education program. So again, what are the outcomes of your program? So if you're a science teacher and you're trying to teach about physics and forces of flight and lift, weight, thrust, and drag, your lessons are going to look very different for somebody who is trying to start a drone business, right? So, but you have to understand that because this technology goes across multiple disciplines, you need to keep that in mind when you are developing your education program. And then the final thing that they suggest, and those of us that have worked in education for any length of time, and even this will happen in business as well, is that getting financial buy-in can oftentimes be a challenge. There's a cost to the drones, there's batteries, propellers, netting. Then you have the cost for training your staff, your team to become certificated pilots. There's cost for insurance. So getting that financial buy-in can be a difficult challenge. And so what you want to do there is make sure that you're being very clear, very transparent. This is what it's going to cost, but here's what the benefits are going to be for us. And here's how this is going to help us as a school, an education program, or a business. Being very clear with what that financial investment is going to do for your organization. So this was a really great article, and like I said, it cited quite a few other research articles that I will be sharing with you guys as well. I will put the links to all the different articles that were reviewed here in the show notes. So I suggest that you go check these articles out yourself. There's a lot of really great information in here. And I'm glad I was able to share just a little piece of it with you. So if you like this episode, please share it with somebody that you think might be interested in this. And it helps to spread the news about the podcast. I also have a YouTube channel where I have the podcast placed on the YouTube channel with captions. So people who need the closed captions can still participate in the podcast. And then I've also got different tutorials and some other things on my YouTube channel around drones and learning with drones. So I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. That will also be posted in the show notes. If you are driving and you don't want to, you're not going to be able to look right now, but yeah, my YouTube channel is just Heather Monthy, PhD, CFI, and I hope to see you guys there. And I will see you guys in the next episode.